You remember the sound. You will never, for the rest of your life, forget the sound. It wasn't the screech of tires or the shriek of twisting metal. No, the sound that has been carved into the very bedrock of your memory is the sound of your own voice. A raw, primal thing you didn't know you were capable of making as you watched the paramedics load her into the ambulance. Her name was Lily, and she was your whole world. The days that followed were a blur of antiseptic smells, the rhythmic beeping of machines, and the slow, cruel death of hope. The doctors were kind, but their eyes held that practiced professional pity. They spoke in soft, measured tones about catastrophic brain injury and life support. They used phrases like no meaningful recovery and preparing for the worst. They were preparing you to say goodbye. You didn't sleep. You sat in that stiff plastic chair, holding her hand. It was warm, but it was a mechanical warmth, a byproduct of the machines pumping and breathing for her. Her chest rose and fell in a rhythm that wasn't hers. Her face, beneath the tubes and tape, was peaceful, but it was the peace of absence. She wasn't there. The light behind her eyes was gone. On the 7th night, a nurse found you slumped over her bed, whispering a promise into her ear. A desperate, bargaining, soul-selling kind of promise. You weren't a person of faith, not before this. But in that room, with the hum of the ventilator as your only companion, you became one. You prayed to anything that might be listening. You didn't ask for a miracle. You begged, you bargained, you offered everything you were and everything you ever hoped to be, just for a second chance, just to have her back. And then, at 3:03 a.m., the machines screamed. Flatline. The silence that followed the alarm was worse than the sound of the accident. It was absolute. It was final. It was the sound of the universe confirming that your world had just ended. They came in, a team of white coats and steady hands. They pushed you out of the way. You watched through the window as they worked on her, a flurry of controlled chaos. You saw the defibrillator. You saw her body arch off the bed. Once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. The lead doctor, a man with a gray beard and eyes that had seen 1,000 endings, finally looked up. He walked to the door, his face a mask of professional solemnity. You already knew what he was going to say. You could feel the words forming in the air, heavy and cold. "I'm so sorry," he began. "We did everything we could. The time of death is 3:17 a.m. You didn't cry. You were hollow. You were an empty shell standing in a brightly lit hospital corridor. You just nodded. You turned to go back into the room to say a final goodbye to the shell that was left behind. But as your hand touched the door, a sound stopped you cold. Beep. It was soft, tentative, but it was there. You and the doctor both froze, our eyes darting to the cardiac monitor. The line, which had been a flat green ribbon of death, was no longer flat. It was jumping, a small, unsteady rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. The doctor's face went pale. He rushed back to the bed, checking her pulse, her eyes. "That's impossible," he muttered. The nurses looked at each other, a current of something that looked like fear passing between them. Not confusion, not surprise, fear. You pushed past them and took her hand again. It was cold, icy cold. The room was warm, but her skin was like marble pulled from a winter crypt. You looked at her face. Her eyes were open. They were open and they were looking at the ceiling.
but they weren't the same. Lily had eyes the color of warm honey. These eyes were a pale, milky brown, like creek water after a storm, and they were wide, too wide, unblinking. Then her head turned. It wasn't a gradual human movement. It was a sharp, mechanical jerk like a bird's. Her head swiveled on her neck, and those muddy eyes locked on yours. Her lips parted. A thin line of drool, tinged with something dark, slipped from the corner of her mouth. She took a long, slow breath. It was a breath that seemed to pull all the air, all the warmth into her lungs. And then, in a voice that was hers but wasn't, a voice that echoed as if coming from the bottom of a deep well, she spoke. "It's so dark in there. Why did you call me back?" You wanted to scream, you wanted to run, but you were frozen, held in place by the impossible reality of it. This was what you begged for. This was your miracle. The doctors, of course, called it a medical marvel, a spontaneous return of neural function, a statistical anomaly. They had 100 scientific terms for it, but you saw the way they looked at her, the way they hesitated before entering her room, the way they made their checks quick and left faster. You took her home. The first week was a waking nightmare disguised as a blessing. She was mobile. She could eat, she could speak, but it was all off, a terrible, uncanny mimicry of your sister. She would stare at the television for hours, even when it was off. You'd find her standing in the kitchen in the dead of night, just staring at the knives in the butcher block. Once you heard her in the bathroom, whispering. You pressed your ear to the door. It wasn't words you heard, but a stream of wet, clicking sounds, like someone trying to speak underwater. One night, you mustered the courage to ask her. You were sitting across from her at the dinner table. She was eating a bowl of soup, her movements jerky and imprecise, the spoon clinking against her teeth. You said to her, your voice trembling, "Lily, do you remember the accident?" She stopped. The spoon hovered halfway to her mouth. She slowly lowered it back into the bowl, the ceramic clinking with a sound that felt too loud. She looked up at you, and for a fleeting second you saw it, a flicker of something behind those muddy eyes. Recognition, pain. It was gone in an instant, replaced by that uncanny placid blankness. "I remember a door," she said, her voice flat, "a big black door. It was warm on the other side, like being held. I was so tired, I just wanted to sleep. But I heard you calling me. I heard you begging." A long pause. "So I had to come back. But the door, it was heavy. Something held it open for me, and when I came through, it followed." The spoon in your hand clattered to the table. What are you talking about? What followed?"
She smiled. It was a ghastly imitation of a smile, a stretching of lips that didn't reach her eyes. "Don't you feel it?" she whispered, leaning forward. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet. "Don't you feel it, watching from the corners? It's always waiting. It's just waiting for me to forget how to be her." You wanted to believe she was traumatized, confused, that it was brain damage manifesting as paranoid delusions. You wanted to believe that so badly. That's when the scratching started. It was faint at first, coming from inside the walls of her room. You'd ask her about it, and she'd just tilt her head, that bird-like motion, and say, "It's just trying to find a way in. It gets confused. It thinks I'm still on the other side." You stopped sleeping. You spent your nights on the couch, staring at her door, listening. The scratching would come and go. But one night, it stopped. The silence was worse.
You crept to her door and peered through the crack. The room was dark, but you could see her silhouette sitting up in bed. She wasn't moving. She was just sitting. Then a low, guttural voice came from her throat. It wasn't her voice. It was something older, something that sounded like rocks grinding together deep underground. It spoke in a language you've never heard, a language full of wet consonants and hissing vowels. It was a conversation. She was talking to something, and it was talking back. You threw the door open, flicking on the light. Lily was sitting there, perfectly still. She looked at you, and in her own voice she asked, "What's wrong?" "Who were you talking to?" you demanded, your heart hammering against your ribs. She just stared at you for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then a slow, wide smile spread across her face. It was the biggest smile you'd seen from her since the accident. It was her smile, but it was wrong. It was too big. It showed too many teeth. "You," she said. "I was talking to you." You should have left then. You should have run and never looked back. But she was your sister, and in the brief, fleeting moments when she seemed like herself, you clung to the hope that the real Lily was still in there, fighting. You sought help. You found a priest, an older man with kind eyes but a weary soul. You told him everything. He listened without judgment. He agreed to come to the house and perform a blessing. He arrived on a Thursday afternoon. Lily was in her room. The priest stood in the living room, sprinkling holy water and murmuring prayers in Latin. The air felt thick, heavy. As he moved towards the hallway leading to her room, he stopped dead. He looked at you, and for the first time you saw genuine terror in his eyes. "There's something in the walls of this house," he whispered. "It's not just in her. It's in the space around her. It's woven into the place." He continued, his voice more urgent now. He reached her door and began the prayers for protection. As he spoke, the scratching started, but it wasn't in the walls this time. It was coming from inside her room, a frantic, furious scratching like claws on wood. Then a crash. You both rushed in. Lily was standing in the corner, her back to you. Her dresser mirror had been shattered, glass shards all over the floor. The priest held up his cross, his hand shaking. "In the name of God, I command you to show yourself." Lily turned around. Her face was a mask of fury, but it wasn't her fury. Her eyes were completely black, not dark brown, black, like two pools of crude oil. She smiled, and this time her smile kept going, stretching further than a human mouth should go. Black fluid, thick and syrupy, began to drip from her nose, her ears, the corners of that impossibly wide mouth. She took a step towards the priest, and her voice, layered with that grinding, ancient sound, filled the room. "You have no authority here, little man. She called us. She begged for us. This shell is an open door, and you cannot close it." The priest tried to stand his ground, reciting a louder prayer. The thing wearing your sister lunged, not at him, but at the wall. It slammed its hands, Lily's hands, against the drywall, and the scratching started again. But it was different. It was inside the walls, traveling, moving. You heard it skittering up into the attic, down into the basement. The entire house groaned, as if it was a living thing in pain. The priest grabbed your arm and pulled you out of the house. He was pale, drenched in sweat. "You cannot stay here," he panted. "That is not your sister. It's a doorway, a wound in the world, and whatever came through, it's been busy. It's made a nest." You spent the night in a motel. You didn't sleep. You just stared at the ceiling, the priest's words echoing in your head. A nest. What did that mean? The next morning you drove back. You had to see. You had to know. The house was quiet, eerily quiet. You called her name. Nothing. You walked to her room. The door was open. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, facing the corner. She was rocking back and forth, gently. "Lily," you whispered. She stopped rocking. Her head twisted an impossible 180 degrees, like an owl, until she was facing you. Her face was clear. The black oil was gone. Her eyes were their normal color. She looked tired, scared, and more like herself than she had in weeks. Your heart soared with a desperate, foolish hope. "I'm so tired," she whimpered, her voice small and broken. "It won't let me sleep. It talks to me all the time. It shows me things. It wants me to let it in completely." You rushed to her, kneeling in front of her. "I'm here. I'm going to fix this. I'm not leaving you." She placed a cold hand on your cheek. She smiled, a small, sad, genuine smile. "I know you won't. That's what scares me." She leaned in close, her lips brushing your ear. Her whisper was so faint you almost couldn't hear it. "It's not in the walls anymore." You felt it before you understood it. A presence behind you, a shape in the doorway you had just walked through. It was tall, too tall. It had to stoop to fit under the frame. It was made of darkness so complete it seemed to drink the light from the room. And from within that darkness you saw them, eyes, dozens of them, small, wet, glistening eyes, all blinking at different times, all fixed on you. The air turned arctic. Your breath plumed in front of your face. Lily began to shudder, her body convulsing. The thing in the doorway didn't move. It just watched. It was waiting. Lily's shuddering stopped. She went limp in your arms. Then slowly her head lifted. Her eyes were closed. When they opened, they weren't black. They weren't muddy. They were honey brown, warm, human, and filled with a love so profound it broke your heart. For one single fleeting second, it was her, the real Lily. She looked at you, and in her own true voice she whispered, "Run." The smile that followed wasn't hers. It was the thing's smile, stretching her face into a familiar, horrifying mask. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. You could feel its satisfaction radiating off it in waves. The trap was sprung. You tried to move, to obey her final command, but your legs wouldn't work. You were frozen, just like in the hospital. You were staring into the face of your sister, but the thing looking back was ancient, hungry, and patient. It had waited in the dark, and you had delivered it exactly what it wanted. You had given it a reason to stay. You had given it an anchor. And now it was done playing. It leaned forward, its cold lips brushing your forehead, and in a voice that was a chorus of whispers, it said, "Thank you for calling us back. She kept the door open, but you're the one who invited us in for good."